The words didn't come gently, they landed like a quiet verdict. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mom called and said, "Maybe you should skip this year." Not because there wasn't space. Not because of plans. But because my brother's wife thought I was too poor to feel comfortable at her table. No argument. No defense. Just a suggestion disguised as concern. So I stayed quiet. I didn't explain. I didn't show proof. I let them have their assumptions. Then, days after Thanksgiving, my name appeared in the headlines. And suddenly, everyone wanted to talk. Thanksgiving used to be one of the few days each year when I still felt like I belonged to my family. No matter how busy life became, there was always an assumption, quiet but firm, that I would be there. My name is Jordan Hale, and for most of my life, I learned to stay quiet when my family decided who I was supposed to be. That changed 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, when my mom called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice was careful, softer than usual, the way it gets when she's already decided something but doesn't want to say it outright. "Sweetheart," she began, stretching the word like a cushion, "I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving this year. 18 sporting ones, at inclines to Malman." I smiled to myself, already picturing the familiar chaos. My brother carving the turkey too early, football murmuring in the background. My mom pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. "Of course," I said. "What time should I come?" There was a pause. Not the kind where someone loses signal, the kind where they're choosing words that won't land gently no matter how carefully they're wrapped. "Well," she said slowly, "we were thinking. Maybe it would be better if you skipped this year." I laughed, assuming I'd misheard her. "Skipped?" She cleared her throat. "It's nothing personal. It's just, your brother's wife has been under a lot of stress. Hosting, expectations. You know how these things can be." I waited. I knew there was more. "She mentioned," my mom continued, lowering her voice as if the walls could hear, "that she worries you might feel uncomfortable. With the house. The guests. The lifestyle." My stomach tightened. "Uncomfortable how?" Another pause. Longer this time. "She thinks," my mom said quietly, "that you might feel out of place. Financially." The word hung between us, heavy and humiliating. Too poor. She didn't say it, but it didn't need saying. I stared at the wall of my apartment, suddenly aware of how small it must look to them. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I understand," I said. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to know I would never hear that invitation the same way again. After I hung up the phone, I sat in silence longer than I expected to. At first, I told myself it was just an awkward misunderstanding. One comment taken too far. One suggestion poorly phrased. But the longer I replayed my mother's words, the more I realized this hadn't come out of nowhere. It was a pattern. One I had been stepping around for years. It showed up in small comments that were always framed as concern. My sister-in-law asking, "Is that jacket warm enough for winter?" while glancing at the label. My mom suggesting I wait in the car when they went into certain stores because, as she put it, you wouldn't like the prices. My brother casually offering to cover the bill at restaurants without waiting for me to respond, then joking, "It's fine. I know things are tight for you." Things were not tight. They were simply different from what my family valued. I didn't live in a large house. I didn't drive a new car. I didn't post vacations or expensive dinners online. Somewhere along the way, those choices had been translated into a story about me, one where I was struggling, falling behind, quietly failing. My sister-in-law fit perfectly into the opposite narrative. She dressed the part, she spoke the language of appearances fluently. When she walked into a room, my mother straightened, my brother smiled wider. Compliments came easily to her. How polished she was, how well she hosted, how lucky my brother was. And I became the contrast. No one ever said it outright, but I was the one they worried about, the one they adjusted plans for, the one whose presence needed to be managed. When I thought back on it honestly, Thanksgiving wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel like an inconvenience. It was just the first time they'd said it clearly enough that I couldn't pretend it was anything else. This wasn't about one holiday. It was about how little space they believed I deserved to take. What hurt most wasn't being excluded. It was the certainty behind it. My family didn't wonder whether I was struggling. They had already decided. Somewhere along the way, my quieter life had been interpreted as a lack of success. Because I didn't talk about work at the dinner table, because I wore clothes until they wore out. Because I lived within my means instead of advertising them. To them, silence meant shortage. They never asked what I actually did. Beyond vague questions I answered carefully. Consulting. Project work. Things that didn't invite follow-ups. When my sister-in-law once asked why I didn't aim higher, my brother laughed and said, "She's always been low maintenance." Low maintenance. As if that explained everything. The truth was, I had learned early not to defend myself. Every time I tried to explain my choices, they heard excuses. Every time I mentioned a win, it was minimized or redirected. So eventually I stopped offering details. Not out of secrecy but out of self-preservation. Let them assume, I told myself. It's easier than correcting people who don't want to hear the truth. That's why when my mom suggested I skip Thanksgiving, for my own comfort I didn't push back. I didn't list facts. I didn't say, "You're wrong about me." I simply accepted it. I understand. I had told her. And I meant it not because she was right but because arguing would have changed nothing. They had already written the story they believed in. And for the first time, I decided I wouldn't interrupt it. If they were so certain I had nothing, I would let them keep believing that right up until the moment reality spoke for itself. After that call, I didn't announce anything. I didn't vent to friends. I didn't post vague quotes online or drop hints in the family group chat. I simply went quiet. At first, the silence felt unnatural, like holding my breath underwater. I was used to smoothing things over, to explaining myself just enough to keep the peace. This time, I resisted the urge. Not out of spite but out of clarity. I finally understood that my words had never been the problem. Their assumptions were. So I let them stand. While my family was busy planning place settings and guest lists, my days were filled with deadlines that didn't allow for emotional detours. Early mornings. Long meetings. Documents reviewed line by line. Conversations that required precision, not permission. There were contracts to finalize. Decisions waiting on signatures. A timeline that could not be delayed for a holiday I was no longer invited to. I noticed how different it felt to exist in a space where my presence wasn't questioned. Where no one measured my worth by what I wore or where I lived. Where results spoke louder than appearances. In that world, silence wasn't absence, it was focus. My phone stayed quiet longer than usual. No follow-ups from my mom. No explanation from my brother. It confirmed what I already knew. Once I stepped out of their expectations, I ceased to matter. And strangely, that gave me peace. Silence stopped being something done to me and became something I chose. A boundary I didn't need to announce. A pause that protected my energy while everything else moved forward exactly as it was supposed to. They mistook my quiet for compliance. What they didn't realize was that it was preparation. Thanksgiving came and went without me, exactly as they had planned. I didn't see it myself, of course, but I heard enough afterward to picture it clearly. The house was full. The table was dressed carefully, every detail intentional. My sister-in-law took charge the way she always did, moving through the kitchen like the role had been waiting for her. Hosting suited her. It reinforced the version of the family she wanted everyone to see. My absence barely registered as a loss. If anything, it simplified things. From what my cousin later mentioned, my name came up only once briefly, and with a shrug. She couldn't make it this year, my mom had said. No explanation. No defense. Just a polite erasure. Someone joked that I probably had work stuff, and my brother laughed, adding that I was keeping things low-key, as usual. The comment landed easily because it fit the story they already believed. The one where I lived smaller, needed less, mattered quietly. Dinner went on. Glasses clinked. Photos were taken. My sister-in-law basked in approval, praised for her home, her taste, her effort. My brother looked comfortable in his role beside her, successful, settled, validated, and somewhere between dessert and football, they likely felt confirmed in their decision. I wasn't missed because I wasn't considered essential. While they carved turkey and congratulated themselves on a smooth holiday, I spent the evening elsewhere working, Yes, but also free from the careful choreography of being tolerated. They thought Thanksgiving without me proved something about my place in the family. They were wrong. It only proved how easily they had underestimated what I was no longer willing to give. The headlines didn't wait for permission. They never do. They appeared the Monday after Thanksgiving. Quietly at first, an article shared in industry circles, a press release published before most people finished their morning coffee. By noon, it was everywhere that mattered. My name sat there in black and white, unmistakable. Not in the context my family knew me by, but in a world they had never bothered to imagine I belonged to. The announcement was precise, restrained, impossible to misinterpret. A finalized deal. A leadership role. Numbers large enough to make people pause. I saw it on my screen before anyone else reached out. I didn't feel triumphant. Just calm. This wasn't a reveal, it was a confirmation of work that had already been done. Then, the calls started. My phone buzzed once. Then again. Messages stacked on top of each other, some from numbers I hadn't heard from in months. The tone shifted immediately from casual distance to urgent curiosity. Is this you? Why didn't you tell us? Since when? My mother's message came last. Short. Careful. I just saw something online. Call me when you can. I imagined them reading it in real time. My brother pausing mid-scroll. My sister-in-law rereading the headline, trying to reconcile it with the version of me she had dismissed. The woman who was supposedly too poor to sit at her table now had her name attached to something publicly undeniable. For the first time, there was no room for interpretation. No way to soften it. No explanation that could be minimized or reframed. The world had spoken before I did. And in doing so, it exposed the quiet truth they had never asked for. My life had moved forward without their approval, and far beyond their assumptions. I set my phone face down and went back to work. I had nothing left to prove. By that evening, the tone of every message had changed. What started as cautious curiosity quickly turned into urgency. My brother called twice within an hour, something he hadn't done in years. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail that tried and failed to sound casual. Hey, just wanted to talk. Call me back. My mom's texts grew longer, more emotional with each one. She said she was confused, that she felt hurt I hadn't shared such important news. That families weren't supposed to find things out through headlines. It was strange hearing concern now, when silence had felt so acceptable only days earlier. The most telling messages came from my sister-in-law. She didn't call. She sent carefully worded texts filled with polite disbelief. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The media exaggerates these things. We should clear this up before people get the wrong idea. Before people get the wrong idea. I could picture her panic clearly. The fear wasn't about me, it was about perception. About neighbors, colleagues, extended family connecting dots she had confidently erased. The woman she deemed too poor now existed publicly in a way that challenged her judgment. My brother followed up with apologies that didn't quite reach accountability. He said he hadn't known. That he'd assumed I would have mentioned it if it mattered. That things had gotten miscommunicated. Miscommunicated, as if exclusion had been an accident. My mom finally called late that night. Her voice was soft again, but this time it trembled. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. I almost laughed. They weren't asking because they wanted to understand me. They were asking because their certainty had collapsed and they needed a new version of the story, one where they hadn't been wrong. For the first time, they weren't setting the narrative. And they didn't know what to do without it. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it once and mean it. 2 days later, I agreed to a call with my mom and my brother. My sister-in-law stayed quiet, which told me everything I needed to know. Silence, I had learned, is often loudest when someone is afraid of being exposed. My mom spoke first. She apologized, but carefully. She said she never meant to hurt me. That she was only trying to keep the peace. That things had been misunderstood. I let her finish. Then I said calmly, "You didn't misunderstand me. You misunderstood my worth." The line went quiet. I explained without anger how being asked to skip Thanksgiving wasn't about logistics or comfort, it was about judgment. About deciding I didn't belong because of assumptions no one bothered to question. I told them how long I had felt reduced, managed, quietly sidelined. My brother tried to interrupt, saying he hadn't realized it was that serious. I stopped him gently. You didn't realize because it didn't affect you. That landed. I made it clear I wasn't upset about money, or headlines, or recognition. I was upset that respect had been conditional. That my place in the family had depended on appearances instead of character. I'm not asking for apologies that only exist because you're embarrassed now, I said. And I'm not interested in suddenly being included because I look acceptable. I told them what would change going forward. No more explanations. No more minimizing. No more decisions made about me without me. If I was invited, it would be because I was wanted, not tolerated. And if that couldn't happen, distance would. There was no yelling. No threats. Just boundaries finally spoken aloud. And for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. What stayed with me after everything settled wasn't the headlines or the sudden attention, it was the clarity. For years, I had mistaken silence for invisibility. I thought if I didn't speak louder, explain more, prove harder, I would disappear. What I learned instead was that silence, chosen intentionally, can be strength. It can protect you when words are only used against you. Money didn't change who I was. It simply removed the doubt others used to justify their behavior. The truth is, people who look down on you rarely do it because of what you lack, they do it because your quiet confidence makes them uncomfortable. They fill that discomfort with assumptions. I no longer feel the need to correct every false narrative. I don't chase acceptance from people who required proof I didn't owe them. Family, like any relationship, should be built on respect, not comparison. If there's one lesson I took from this, it's this: never let anyone define your worth based on assumptions. Silence can be powerful, boundaries are necessary, and self-respect is not selfish. You don't owe anyone proof of your value, only honesty with yourself. I didn't lose a seat at the table. I learned how to build my own and decide who earns a place there. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Do you think I did the right thing? Put yourself in my place and tell me honestly what you would have done. Your comments matter to me more than you know, because stories like this don't end when the video does, they continue through shared experiences. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your support helps this channel grow, and your voice might help someone else feel less alone.